Hello and welcome. I'm Walt Belofsky, president of the San Francisco Bay chapter of FFRF, the Freedom from Religion Foundation. On behalf of our chapter and our partner organizations, the Humanist community in Silicon Valley and the atheist community of San Jose, we all welcome you to today's program. And thank you to the Humanist community and the San Francisco Public Library for providing the Zoom link for those of you joining us online. The Freedom from Religion Foundation is the country's largest association of atheists, agnostics, and humanists. With some 42,000 members and 24 chapters nationwide, FFRF is dedicated to defending the constitutional principle of separation of church and state. Our chapter gives FFRF a presence in the Bay Area and does outreach at farmers markets and community events. We hold a monthly social luncheon at restaurants around the Bay Area and host occasional programs like this one. Now I'll turn the microphone over to another member of our board of directors, Dana Treadwell.
I want to thank you for that intro and for being here. It is my honor to introduce Dan Barker, one of our fearless FFRF co-presidents, as our guest here today. As many of you know, Dan is an ex-priest, and he wasn't just any priest. He became a teen evangelist at the age of 15 and then went on to become an ordained evangelical minister. And as Dan tells it, he is the guy you did not want to sit next to on the bus. It was his, he's nodding, it was his mission and calling to educate you about sin and the love of Jesus. Now, to his credit, Dan walked the talk. He traveled the country and parts of Mexico spreading the word, which he believed to be true. Fortunately, Dan is a curious being and a fervent pursuer of truth. So he questioned and he read and read and read. He researched and reasoned his way out of the church. He lost faith in faith and became an atheist. And after meeting Annie Laurie, our other fearless co-president, on the Oprah Winfrey Show, which if you haven't seen it, it's worth looking up on YouTube. It's a great episode. After that, he decided to devote his professional life to FFRF. So he is still a missionary, but fortunately for us, his efforts and messages now are focused on the tenets of FFRF. And I want to say, he now travels the world debating theologians and promoting the importance of keeping religious belief out of government policy. So we're really glad, Dan, that you decided to brave a Northern California winter to come here and share your vast biblical knowledge with us today. And he's going to share songs and stories tomorrow in Palo Alto. Then he'll visit the greater Sacramento chapter on Monday. So thank you for making this trek. And I ask you all to please join me in giving Dan a warm welcome.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Mark and Judy, for your hospitality down there in Mountain View. Yeah. Last night, actually, we watched that Oprah show at their neighbor's house. I said, really, you're on an Oprah show? It was actually called AM Chicago. It was just a few months before Oprah went national. She had a local Chicago show. And it brought back so many memories because that very year, 1984, I was still in the ministry and I had left in January of that year. So, and that show, if you watch it, was the very first time I had ever publicly spoken about my atheism, humanism, before any audience. Because what happens when a minister leaves the pulpit? Where's their audience? They just sort of fade away. And you probably know that I co-founded the Clergy Project a few years ago, which is former and active members of the clergy, priests, ministers. By the way, I didn't call myself a priest. Those are more like Catholic Anglicans, but it's the same thing. I was an ordained reverend, I guess. And so I had read Annie Laurie's book, Woe to the Women, The Bible Tells Me So, and I was so impressed with it, a little thin book. So I wrote her a letter that year in 84, and thanking her for the book. And I said, by the way, I just left the ministry and I thought I was the only one. I didn't know. And she didn't answer me, but her mother did, Ann Gaylor, who was the principal founder of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And they invited me to speak at their convention that year. But before that, Oprah Winfrey's producers contacted Ann Gaylor because Ann and Annie Laurie had been on her show when she hosted in Baltimore. Before that, she said, let's do a show about atheism. So, and Oprah's producer said, do you know anybody who's come out of religion? And Ann said, well, we just got this letter from this guy in California. So they flew me to Chicago. And that was the very first time I had publicly said anything about any of this. I had thought about it all. And if you watch the show, you can see me kind of groping for words for the very first time. Now they just flow out, after decades of talking about all this. That was the day Annie Laurie and I actually met. We were going to meet anyway at the convention, but that was the first day actually that we met, was in the green room of that show. And that was fun. And it was pretty good TV too. Oprah had packed that audience with a bunch of Bible thumpers, and one of them was telling Annie Laurie, young woman, the devil's in you. I can tell the devil's in you. So it was pretty good TV. Then in 85, I moved to Madison, Wisconsin, which is the national headquarters of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And Annie Laurie sends her greetings as she's watching them shovel snow outside of her house. In really cold weather. And the foundation had started in the mid-70s. As Walt said, we have almost 42,000. The numbers keep going up like this, so we were over 42,000 for a while, but we're close to that again. And all over the country, and many around the world, with two purposes: to keep state and church separate and to educate the public about the views of non-theists. And we don't really care what word. Atheist, most of our members call themselves atheists, but some don't. Some prefer agnostic or secular humanist or skeptic or doubter, and we don't care. We're not a specifically atheistic group, although most of our members are non-theists. So we like to use the word freethinker. Freethinker is like an umbrella word that encompasses all of this, whatever we do or don't call ourselves, or even if we don't call ourselves anything. We want to keep religion and government separate, and we want a place at the table too. We want to, the churches have all the freedom to express their views, so why shouldn't we as well? So we have 10 full-time attorneys right now, and a legal staff in addition, and we also have some legal fellows, and often, especially in the summer, legal interns. So there's a big legal staff responding to complaints all over the country of violations of the separation of state and church. And our legal director, Patrick Elliott, at the end of the year, gave us a report of 2025 and told us that the legal team at FFRF sent out 600 letters during the year. And of those 600 letters of complaints, 200 of them resulted in a victory. It resulted in stopping the violation. A very recent one was a teacher in the South Carolina elementary school who had plastered her entire door of her schoolroom with the nativity scene and "For unto us a Savior is born." And a family with a non-religious family complained. They didn't want to be named. You can imagine in some of these cities, they got to keep their heads down. They don't want to say there was, so they complained to us. Our attorneys were able to send a letter, and that thing came down almost immediately. It's things like that are happening around. It could be at the federal level. We also have a C4 group, which does advocacy, and we have a full-time lobbyist in DC, and we have a staff working at the state level. And surprisingly, we have staff, they can monitor school boards. And there's thousands of school boards around the country. They can monitor what's happening. Are they praying at the school board? What are they doing? We had a big victory in Chino, California. Actually, it was like 8 years ago. This big mega church in town got all of their people elected to the school board, and they turned their school board meeting at a public school into a big religious meeting with Jesus and everybody there praying and all of that. And sometimes students come to these school board meetings for just general, they're not there to worship or pray. They're there. And so we sued, and they lost on appeal, and they had to pay, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they're trying to reopen the case. They thought, now there's a new Supreme Court, maybe we can get away with it. Well, they sued and we defended ourselves, and the judge just squashed that and said, no, you can't do that. You can't turn a public school board into a private religious mission. And those of you who read our newspaper, Free Thought Today, you keep up on all of these victories. There's always a few pages of these victories each month. And in addition to the letters, the lawsuits, we have a litigation team, which we sometimes do have to go to court. We have to sue over that. And our track record, we win most of the cases. And the cases where we don't win, most often we lose not on the merits, but on standing, if you know what that means. The court says you just don't have the right to take this case. So we have a very good track record of defending that really important principle of state and church separation, which is enshrined in our Constitution, in the First Amendment. So if you want to know more about FFRF, you can go to ffrf.org. Of course, you chapter members already know about all this probably, so what am I telling you? So I was invited to talk about my book. It came out, when was it, 2016? The exact time it came out. If some of you have the original copy, shows the public. And it's been reprinted now by Prometheus Books. God, the most unpleasant character in all fiction. And I have 11 books out now. My most recent one is called Contradiction, which basically is the death of the design argument. It's more philosophy. And I invented the word contradiction, not contradiction, but contradiction. And a thin book. And philosophers and some teachers are using it as sort of a way to introduce a new way to think about some of these arguments, especially the argument from fine tuning, so-called fine tuning, and these other design arguments as well. But God, the most unpleasant character in all fiction, it was sort of a surprise book. Most of you have read, or many of you have read, Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. And Dawkins has been described as a strident, angry atheist, right? He's fighting God. If you read the God Delusion, there's very little in there that you would call strident. It's calm, rational, but there's a phenomenon in psychology, and maybe some of you psychologists would know better about this. It's called projection. If I say something that makes you angry, you take your anger and project it back on me. Say, why are you so angry, Dan? We do that a lot. When in Richard's book really had some strong words, but it wasn't like strident angry. It was calm and rational. But there was one sentence in the book, the first sentence of chapter 2, where Richard, maybe I'll read it to you if I find it here, where Richard, where is it here? There's the preface. He said, well, let me just sort of paraphrase it. The first sentence of chapter 2 of the God Delusion said, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, and unforgiving control freak. And he went on and he listed like 19 different characteristics of the God of the Old Testament. And he was criticized heavily from that one basic sentence, which does seem kind of striking, although he wasn't attacking any believers. He wasn't going after anybody, any philosophers or believers. He was just going after that character in the Bible. And a rabbi in England even accused him of being anti-Semitic. But to his credit, he realized, no, he's just criticizing that God character of the Bible. And so to defend himself, Richard was thinking, well, I should have a PowerPoint display where I have the main part of the sentence here, and then like a spider diagram. And then there'll be 19 legs of the spider going out, and each one of them would be one of those nasty characteristics, right? Petty, unforgiving, all of those things. It's with the word bully. And so he emailed me and he said, Dan, you were a preacher. Do you think you could gather some of these verses to actually prove it? And I said, sure, I'd love to do that. So we started working on it. And after a while, there got to be so many verses. They're not going to fit on a PowerPoint slide. I mean, even if you clicked on it, it would be so many. And Richard said, you know what? This would make a good book. Unintended, a good book. And I thought, yes, of course, where each of those legs is a chapter of the book. So that's how the book got born with the research. And it took more than a year, but it took about 14 or 15 months of working on it, spanning 2 different summers. And I took every single one of those and documented with the Bible verses themselves. And I used different English translations, more than 20 different translations. So there's a variety there. And by the way, you got to be careful because Bible translators, the owners of the translations, they own the rights. And if you use more than 250 Bible verses in your book, you have to pay royalties to that, like at the NIV Bible. So I had to be careful. I had to make sure none of them came out to more than 250. I also learned, and this is fascinating, that the King James Version is owned by the British monarchy, the King James Version. And you need permission from, well, it was the Queen at the time. You need permission from the monarchy in order to quote from the King James Bible. But it's a pro forma thing, you know, in England only, not in the United States. You can quote that one all you want in the United States. So I broke the book into 2 parts. And part 1 of the book is called Dawkins Was Right. I read his sentence, and then each chapter, the first chapter is jealous. And it was a good word to start with. I don't know if Dawkins really thought this through, if it was accidentally his first word, but jealous turns out to be. In fact, there's a verse in the Old Testament where God says, "My name is jealous." That's his name, my God, whose name is jealous. And it's jealous because it's like a husband who controls his wife like an abusive, controlling husband, and this is my property, and you need to worship me, you need to love me. And if you ever look at another man, you're going to be in trouble. And jealousy is all through it, and that's basically what it's all about, is worship me, me, me. I'm the big man. I'm the one you should pay attention to. Don't look at anyone else. So, and you'll see that all through it. And that God, whose name is jealous, was vicious when his bride, and he even called himself a husband of the bride of the nation of Israel, if they went straying, and he used all these sexual imagery. They're whoring after other gods, they would say. And I was reading stuff I didn't remember preaching when I was a preacher. We never preached from some of this stuff. However, as I was going through the book, going through the Old Testament, I realized that Dawkins was right, but he didn't go far enough. There were other attributes. So the first part 1 has jealous, petty, unjust, unforgiving, control freak, vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser, misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic. That was the hardest one, by the way. Capriciously malevolent. That was the easiest one. Bully. Those 19 words. But then I have a part 2 of the book that says, it's titled, Dawkins Was Too Kind. Because I have an extra chapter called Pyromaniacal. And by the way, I was surprised how much fire there is in the Old Testament. Fire, fire, fire. You're going to be scorched earth. And just a whole lot of fire in the Old Testament. Even Jesus carried some of that through in the New Testament. Angry. I think angry was the longest chapter. The anger, the wrath of the God of the Old Testament. Just anger and different types of anger. Anger that's being spewed out. Anger that's being, anger through fire. Just all different types of anger of this loving husband, the God character. Merciless, many specific verses where God says, I will show them no mercy. I will be merciless to them. Curse hurling, a lot of curses. The big covenant in Deuteronomy, which in a lot of denominations, the covenant is the big deal. It's like there's like covenant Baptist churches. And what the covenant with the nation of Israel in Deuteronomy was kind of like a marriage vow. It was your covenant. You're going to get together. I'll be your husband. You be my wife. And you read the covenant, and it starts with blessings. If you obey me, and you will be my bride, and then all these blessings will come to you with your crops and with your family and just a long list of blessings. Then it switches. But if you don't obey me, if you look at someone else, if you betray me, then there's 4 times as many curses. Just blood-curdling curse after curse after curse, including you're going to eat your own children. I mean, just stuff that you never hear from the pulpit. And so, what if a couple was getting married, and the husband says to her, I love you, and I promise to love you, and I will take care of you, and I will take care of your needs, and I will bless you. But if you ever look sideways at another man, I'm going to pull your hair out. I'm going to spread dog poop on your face. I'm going to gouge out your eye. I'm going to, I'm not making this up. That's actually there, dung on the face of the people. And what kind of love is that? What kind of a marriage ceremony is that, really? It's a controlling love. And you hear a lot about the Bible is a book of love. Well, yes, there's love all through the Bible, but it's not love that you and I would recognize. You and I think about love in a totally different way. The love you and I think of, most of us, especially as humanists, feminists, love is mutual. It's horizontal. We respect each other as people, like this, right? But in the Bible, love is not bottom up or horizontal. It's top down. It's a controlling love. There's very few places, surprisingly, in the Old Testament where, I think only 2 or 3 that I found, where a person said that they loved God. Very rare. You won't find that. And what was it? I think it was Saul loved God by killing 10,000 people. I know he showed his love by sacrificing, and there was the bloodthirsty verse. So yes, it's love, but it's not the kind of love you and I would think is like human love. Wait, I lost my place. Hold on. Curse hurling back societal. In other words, killing of animals. And there's a whole lot of that. God's anger had to be appeased by something dying. Animals had to be shed. And then, of course, in Christian theology, the final Lamb of God who was slain was Jesus. His blood had to be shed. What kind of being is that? In order to keep me from getting angry at you, something's got to die. And so it was death, death, death. And aborticidal, there are actually passages where abortion was a penalty, where I will cause the fruit of your womb to wither if you don't love me, and I'm going to. And then cannibalistic. There's a number of passages where you're going to eat your own kids. It's going to get so bad. As a direct curse from God Himself. Slave monger, and we all know that the Bible is a slave manual. Homicidal, evil, and this was for me a very powerful chapter, because the word evil in the Hebrew is ra, which in most languages that word can mean different things in different contexts. In fact, reading the Bible in Spanish, the word evil is just the same as the word bad, mal, maldad, mal. So, and in the Latin language too. But I looked for verses, not where there was evil like humans were being bad. Usually when humans are bad, it's called wicked. But God Himself created evil, commanded it, committed it, bragged about it. Evil, shall evil befall a city unless the Lord hath not done it? So He really is an evil God. And then finally, terrorist. And I point out that Obama, during one of his speeches, said, talking about Islam, he said, no God condones terror. No God would be a terrorist. But of course, the God of the Old Testament used the word terror to describe His actions against the people that He was angry with. And I ended with the chapter 31, what about Jesus? Because the Old Testament, well, that was the Old Testament, and Jesus was love. And the New Testament is less violent overall, but it's still there. And even Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I and the Father are one. He quoted those same Old Testament passages with approval. He never denounced them. He never denounced slavery. And so it was nice. And of course, it was different times. But in any event, his message was really to continue the obedience to that same father figure. So that's kind of a nutshell. And there's stories in the Bible that I think I remember reading when never in Sunday school, but I remember reading them if you've read through the Bible. And the book of Job, for example, is in the chapter Capriciously Malevolent. And most of you have heard about the book of Job. Some of you have read it, right? You probably know the story. But what's Job all about, really? Think about it. What's that book all about? Really, it was kind of an ancient literary attempt at explaining why people suffer, even good people. Why do good people suffer? You know, which is a valid question, and the author of the book of Job was asking that. But really, was there any solution in the book? Is there any moral tale? Is there any moral arc to it? Is there anything in the book of Job that would say, wow, we learned something? I summarized the book of Job in a nutshell. If you want to know what the book of Job is, here it is. God said, Job is a good man. I will torture him to see if he stays good. Job says, why is God punishing me? Job's friends say, it must be your own fault, Job. Job says, I am undeserving, but it's not my fault. Elihu, who is another one of his so-called friends, Elihu said, God is greater than all of us. God said, yes, I am greater than all of you. Job says, you are powerful. I'm sorry. And God said, correct answer. I'll stop torturing you now. That's basically the book of Job. We're supposed to think there's some big biblical moral tale in the book. There's nothing there. And in fact, I think one of the most damning verses in the Bible comes from Job chapter 2, verse 3, where the whole thing started. Remember, Satan was wandering the earth and he met God and he made this deal. And God said to Satan, have you seen Job? Job is blameless. He's sinless. He's my poster child. You know, Job, and Satan said to God, well, he's only that way because you're being nice to him. Of course, you're blessing him. He's only worshiping you because you're really being good to him. So, so Satan said, I bet if you stop being good to him, he'll stop worshiping you. And so in Job 2:3, you should underline this. God admits, he said to Satan, okay, after he tortured him the first time he came back and Job still hadn't cursed God, God said to Job, well, you have caused me to torture Job for no reason. He says it right there, for no reason. He didn't say there was something, it was just a test. And, how would that hold up in a court of law? If somebody comes to your house and they say, hey, you've got some beautiful kids in your house. Wow. And they love you. Yeah, I'm a good dad and I love my kids. Yes, I take care of them. I protect my children and my family. And we even have some pets. And this criminal pedophile comes to your door and says, well, you know what? I bet you if you let me in, I bet you they won't love you anymore. And I say, open the door. Okay, come in. Let's see what happens. So the guy comes in and does his thing and kills the cats. And, you can imagine what happens. The police come and they say, why did you do that? Why did you open the door? Why? You're a good dad, aren't you? And I say, well, the devil made me do it for no reason. That's basically the book of Job, for no reason. He even says that. So I think there's a strong self-indictment there. Then in that same chapter, the story of Samson, I remember reading about it when I was, I guess, in Sunday school. But the Samson story and Samson's wedding, do any of you remember that story? It's like something out of a weird, dark, comic action hero. I mean, it's just this weird thing. His parents know that he was blessed, kind of like Hercules was blessed to be the savior. And when Samson grows up, he catches the eye of a Philistine woman. And the Philistines were the enemies of the Jews. And his parents say, wait a minute, you want to marry a Philistine? They're not even circumcised. And Samson said, well, yes. And then the parents are thinking, well, God gave us this special child. He's going to bless our country, but he's going to go marry a Philistine? So the parents agree. And it was a big deal to get married, properties and all that stuff. And when Samson's heading over to they're heading over to meet the family. Samson's walking and a lion comes out. And so Samson wrestles with the lion and he kills it. And so he goes and he meets the family. He comes back again. And the next time he sees the lion laying on the ground and it's dead. But inside the belly of the lion, there's some beehive. And these bees are, and there's honey. And he sticks his hand in and that's good. And then he takes some of it to the way, hey, have some of this honey. And the Bible says God was doing that as a pretext, as an excuse. And so these Philistine brothers of the wife are very suspicious. She's marrying a Hebrew because they were enemies. And so they were kind of like their swords were almost ready to be drawn. And so Samson makes a bet with these Philistine family of his bride that he's just marrying. It's a 7-day ceremony. He makes a bet. He says, I bet you can't solve this riddle. And he said, out of the, I forget the exact words, but something about out of the beast comes something sweet. And these guys think, what? And if you can solve this riddle, I will give each of you an expensive cloak. I mean, that was a big deal back then. But if you can't solve it by the end of the week, then you give me an expensive cloak. It was like betting, you know. Read the story for yourself. I'm shortening it. It's just really weird. It's part of God's word. And so they're working all week long. How do we solve? What is the riddle? What's the answer? They don't know. So they asked his wife, his new wife, can you tell us the answer? She said, I don't know the answer. He didn't even tell me the answer. And so they said, well, we're going to be ruined. I mean, this is going to be horrible. And so her brothers and said, well, if you don't tell us the answer, we're going to kill your mom and your dad. We're going to kill them. She says, oh, no. So she goes to Samson. She says, can you tell me the answer to the riddle? So he tells her about the lion and the honey, right? This is in the Bible. And so she then betrays him and she tells them all so that she can save her family. And so they give him the answer to the riddle. They got it. And so now he's broke. He's got to go. So then the power of God came on Samson. He was so angry. God wanted him to lose that riddle. God made this thing up and he wanted him to lose it. And he wanted him to lose the bet so that the anger of God could come upon him. And Samson went over to the coast. I think it was called Ashkelon was the name of the city. And he went to another Philistine village and he killed a bunch of those Philistines over there, and he took their garments and he brought it back so he could pay off his debt. So what's the big moral tale there? I mean, what's the story? And really the story was that's how God was able to kill some of the Philistines by doing this whole stupid thing, you know. And so capriciously malevolent is a soft way to say that. But anyway, some of the reading is growing. And when Buzz Kemper and I were recording the audiobook, you can listen to this book. It took forever to record it because there was 1,500 passages in here. And Buzz did the voice of God. He's got this deep voice. And I did the narration parts of it. And so we would record it for a few hours. After we were taking a break, we couldn't even look at each other from some of the stuff that we were, God's word was, but it's done. So there's no question that, can you think of a literary character who was worse than that? Who can you think of in some character, some villain of this word that was worse than that character? Who would you think? Maybe a Shakespearean person or I mean fiction. She said our president. Darth Vader, maybe. Voldemort, maybe. Cruella de Vil. So I think Dawkins was right. The most unpleasant character in all fiction. Now I want to do something. With permission. I do a lot of debates, and I've done 141 public debates, formal public debates with a moderator and a timer and all that. And I really love, since 1985, I really love doing debates. It's one of the funnest things in the world. And there are different topics. Usually, does God exist is the topic, but sometimes the resurrection of Jesus, or sometimes How can you be good without God? That debate comes up a lot. I did 2 debates in Oxford University, the Oxford Union. We had these team debates, and you have to wear a tuxedo with a bow tie and toast the Queen, all that British stuff that was really fun. And so I'm doing a debate on February the 6th that's coming up in Dallas. And I've done something like this before where it's organized by Christians. And I've never invited anyone to debate. I've never challenged anyone to debate, but I keep getting challenged. We all get challenged. They want to put on their events. There's a big apologetics conference in Dallas happening that weekend. And the people coming to it are mostly the theologians, the apologists, the Christian philosophers, that kind of thing. And the guy I'm dealing with is a really nice guy named Marlon. And they're always very nicey at these things because you want to, show how nicey we are. And so they, for part of the debate, they want to give an illustration, an example of how to debate an atheist. So they're bringing me in, and I'm going to be their punching bag, I guess, And I like that. I've done that before. I did that at the Southern Evangelical Seminary with at least 1,000 people from around the country were there. And there were maybe 4 or 5 of my atheist friends huddled in the front row, kind of together, and the whole rest of them were. So usually the debate is, does God exist? And that's a broad topic because it can involve all kinds of things. Like I said, it can involve causality or design arguments, or fine tuning is a big one, morality, the existence of immaterial minds. And by the way, there's a book coming out this year published by a Christian publisher named Erdman's Publishing, who did one of my debates in Florida in 2022 with Andrew Lloyd Johnson. And they transcribed our entire debate, opening statements, rebuttals, and all that, and questions from the audience. And the book starts off with that. And then they have enlisted 7 Christian theist scholars to comment on the debate, and 7 atheists scholars as well to comment on the debate. So it's a balanced thing. And then Adam and I get to round it off with some closing chapters. And I'm kind of excited about it because most of the books I write, they're read by you people, free thinkers, right? Christians are not buying these books, but I get to write for a Christian audience. And Erdman's, the editor told me they're a little bit nervous about this, but they're calling it Debating God's Existence. Believers and skeptics in friendly conversation. And it's friendly, and there's some fire there. We're debating, obviously, but it's done in a nice way. So sometime in the summer, you can see that, and I think you'll enjoy reading both sides, and that's what they want. Let's look at what this side says and what this side said. It was those issues I mentioned, plus the hiddenness argument. If there is a God, why is he hiding himself from people like me, who I'm non-resistant? I would like to know. I really would. So if there's a God who loves someone like me, why is he hiding from me? When I'm saying, hey, I would believe, and I think most of you would too. Doesn't necessarily mean I would like the guy, but I would believe, right? And some of them make the mistake, and even Adam made the mistake in our debate in Florida, saying Dan said that if he ever met God face to face, he would reject him. Well, rejecting his existence is different from rejecting his authority. I might say, yep, you exist, but I don't admire you, and I'm certainly not going to worship you. Someone like this, right? And so Adam didn't get it. He still even didn't get it in the book. But anyway, I'm doing this debate coming up in February 6th, and the topic, which I've confirmed twice now with Marlon, the topic is not does God exist. The topic is, does the God of the Bible exist? That's a different debate. Not does God exist in general. In fact, in my debate with Adam Lloyd Johnson, he argued for what he called mere theism, which means he wasn't arguing for the God of the Bible. He's just arguing philosophically for the idea of mere theism. And I asked, well, what is that? Are we supposed to give it mere worship, or what is? So it's, Christians do believe in a specific God. So in February, I'm doing this debate on does the God of the Bible exist before these apologists. And we have 10-minute openings and then we have closings and all that. So I'm working on an opening statement and it's a rough draft now, but could I try it out on you guys? And you could be the apologistic audience, right? That needs to be convinced. And remembering that the debate is not does God exist, but does the God of the Bible. And my opponent is a very smart philosopher type who's real big into presuppositionalism. You know what that is?
No.
That's presuppers. The Christian apologists fight with each other. You know, there's the traditionalists, there's the evidentialists, there's presuppositionalists, and a lot of them are really, I mean, we don't have to do much fighting with them. They're fighting with each other so much, but I'm suspecting he's, from what I know about him, he's going to be real philosophical. You know, there has to be a first cause. There has to be, you know, that kind of stuff. And I'm hoping to bring the debate specifically to the topic. Even saying, for the sake of debate, let's suppose you're right. All right, let's suppose you've got these great arguments. Now, how do you get from there to the God of the Bible? So let me open up this. And this is a rough draft.
What's presuppositionalists?
Well, they are a type of presuppositionalists. I call them presuppers. They don't use evidence. They don't think evidence, and they don't use Aquinas's arguments either. They don't use any of presuppositionalists. Use this kind of philosophical logic where they say everybody has assumptions. Everybody has to presuppose something. You naturalists, you scientists who are using logic, you are presupposing that logic is logical, right? So if you're free to presuppose an internally self-coherent system that doesn't have any external falsification to it, well, then we can do the same thing. We are going to presuppose the revelation of the Bible is true. And by presupposing the truth of the Bible, it answers all of these. It gives you the source of morality. It gives you the source of creation. And so it's that kind of a thing. And I know you think it's silly, and even a lot of Christians think that's silly. But some of these presuppositions are they're very big on philosophy. Are you an epiphenomenalist or are you a functionalist? Which one? You know what I mean? There's all this stuff that philosopher to philosopher, they love to talk to each other, but us general readers go, who cares? They're just trying to impress each other. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He seems like a nice guy, and he's thought a lot about this. So, but I'm going to, whatever he does, I'm going to try to bring it back to the exact topic. Let me see if I can find this document here. There we go. Does somebody have a stopwatch? Can somebody time it? Because I have 10 minutes only. And all right, well, maybe one or more of you can do it. As soon as I start, the moderator will have their clock too, and I think they'll give us a 1-minute warning. Get some water. Okay, ready to start? You can start. On Easter Sunday in 2008, 11-year-old Kara Newman of Wausau, Wisconsin, died at her home after suffering with horrendous pain for many days from easily treatable diabetes. She died because her Bible-believing parents refused to take her to the hospital. They trusted the God of the Bible, who promised in James 15, "Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord, and the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well. The Lord will raise them up." As a result of this crystal clear promise, a talented and vivacious young girl tragically lost her life on the day that Christians celebrate their Lord's victory over death. Kara's parents were convicted of second-degree reckless homicide, but they remain unrepentant. They still believe they did the right thing because, in fact, the Bible God does promise that prayer will heal the sick. Jesus said in Matthew 21:22, all things whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing, you shall receive. That's pretty clear. He said, all things, not maybe, or if I feel like it, or if you've been good. That word all means all. Combined with the promise in James 5 and other verses, who could blame the Newmans for believing that their prayers would be answered by the loving God who promises to heal illness? And many other verses support their faith. Matthew 18:19 says, if two of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. Mark 11:24, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. These and many other verses from the Bible affirm that believers in the Bible God will experience miracles. Christ and his followers reportedly performed healings, resurrections, and miraculous deeds, and Jesus specifically promised in John 14, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact, will do greater works than these. I will do whatever you ask in my name, so that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If in my name you ask me for anything, I will do it. There's no wiggle room for misinterpretation here. The Bible God said, I will do it. Jesus healed the sick, and so can you. Kara Newman was just one of many victims of faith. Rita Swan of Children's Healthcare as a Legal Duty documented hundreds of other such cases in America alone where children have died because their Christian parents put their faith over their love. Clearly, the Bible does not tell the truth. This is simple logic. The Bible God says he does not lie and he keeps his promises. He promises to answer prayers. Those prayers are not answered. Therefore, the Bible God does not exist. In fact, every time you pray a petitionary prayer, you are proving his non-existence. Why should a loving God have to be asked? Suppose I told you I'm a good father. Then suppose I saw my daughter drowning and I just stood there and watched. And you ask me, why didn't you save her? And I say, you didn't ask, or you didn't ask strongly enough. The Bible God says he is a loving father who will not give a stone for bread, yet he ignores the pleas of his children whom he has promised to love. That is not a good father. Walk into any children's hospital, and you know that the loving God of the Bible does not exist. Good Christian parents are praying desperately for their child to be healed, and their success rate is no better than that of modern medicine. Prayer makes no difference. The absence of miracles is proof that a God of miracles does not exist. If you think there is evidence of miracles, then show me your Nobel Prize for proving the existence of a hitherto unknown force in the cosmos. But there's more. A being with mutually incompatible characteristics cannot exist. Like a married bachelor, A is not equal to not A. The Bible God said he is good, yet he created, commanded, and committed evil. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit. He tells his followers to respect each other, yet he boasted that he rapes women in Jeremiah 13. I myself will lift up your skirts, he said. He said, thou shalt not kill, but then said, kill, 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 including innocent children and many merciless genocides. He says he is just, yet he commits unjust acts, such as punishing children for the deeds of their ancestors and punishing David's adultery by having David's wives raped outside in the sight of everyone. He says all are created in his image, yet he tells his people how to buy and sell slaves. He says he is merciful, yet he commits many confessedly merciless acts. He says he is unchanging, yet he changed his mind. He says he is wise and all-powerful, yet he regretted that he created humans, so he drowned them all. He regretted that he made Saul king. He says he is perfect, yet he created imperfection. Eve, who was created perfect, did something imperfect. He says, no one can see my face. Yet he says some people did see his face. He said, no one is blameless. All have sinned. Yet he said some, such as Job and Noah, were blameless. He says he is all powerful, but he could not defeat chariots of iron. That's in Judges chapter 1. He claims he is all knowing, yet he says the sun orbits the earth, the moon is a light, and the stars are holes in an inverted bowl called the firmament placed over a flat earth. He claims he is all loving, yet he failed to tell us about germs. Jesus even abstained from washing his hands before eating. He is confessedly all wise, all loving, and all powerful, yet he was unable to write a book that is clear enough to keep his followers from killing each other, fracturing into hundreds of bickering interpretations and warring factions. If you presuppose his existence, you are building your house on the sand. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I can explain. Context, metaphor, poetry, proper hermeneutics. Look at the broader theological picture, and so on. When a woman catches her husband in bed with another woman, what does the man often say? I can explain. Well, maybe he can, but he's still in bed with another woman. Any criminal can explain their actions. And why should the perfect word of a loving God have to be explained at all? If the Bible is God's word to the human race, then I am the intended recipient. So I have the right, like that woman, to judge it as I see it. And if I'm not allowed to grasp the true meaning of the Bible without these competing sectarian experts explaining to me what it really means, then God is inept. He's a bad communicator.
1 minute warning.
In my book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, I document more than 1,500 horrific passages showing that even if this God did exist, he would not be worthy of my admiration, much less worship. Maybe some other God exists, and that's another debate. But since the Bible God is confessedly honest, loving, just, merciful, powerful, and miraculous, and since he is actually dishonest, unjust, merciless, inept, contradictory, and impotent, unable to perform the miracles he promised to perform, he does not exist. Karen Newman would have been 28 or 29 years old now, possibly with children of her own, children whose existence was aborted because their gullible grandparents believed in the unreliable, imaginary God of the Bible. That was 10 minutes? A few more seconds. Well, they're going to allow us to talk. They say in a debate, they say you can, as long as you don't keep adding a bunch of semicolons, you can finish your sentence at least, you know.
Good.
So this is going to be edited, and maybe you all have some suggestions, or is there something that didn't ring right or something I could do? But yeah, over here.
Take out the part about Eve doing something wrong.
Oh, sorry.
She'd be wrong.
Well, yeah, you and I would say she didn't do anything wrong, right? That's what you and I would say. Yeah, it's a good point. But they think she did.
But God told them that they would die and they didn't die. So God's a liar.
Yeah. Do I have time to squeeze that in? But, you know, I thought about that because the obvious response is she had free will, right? And if she had free will, then it wasn't God. But even if she had free will, a person with free will who's created perfect would freely choose the right thing. She wouldn't want to do something bad if she was. So this nature that God created in this woman named Eve, supposing she existed, something was wrong with her, or she wouldn't have done something wrong, right?
Eating the apple wrong.
Well, you and I would say no.
Yeah.
You and I would say no, but they would say it's disobedience. So they would say yes. So, but I hear what you're saying. That's like a feminist thing to say. She should have eaten that apple, right? Yeah, she should have been an uppity woman and said, forget this. Yeah. Wait, I need to write something. Let me get something to write on here. And you know, some of those examples, I could cut them and they wouldn't be missed. I mean, I don't want to, you know, if I didn't say the Eve thing, it wouldn't be missed, would it? Well, I don't know. Let me write that down. Anything else? Anybody else have a, yeah?
One of her punishments was painful childbirth. If anybody in the audience would say, if you think there was ever a time a person would have a baby without a baby.
I mean, before that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Would that have been possible at all?
Well, maybe before sin entered the world, I would have preached. There was no pain. There was no suffering.
Forever to be in labor is punishment. That's just a stupid.
I agree, it's stupid, but I'm just trying to figure out what argument should be made.
Yeah,
Why
to
the
try
pain was
the other
first.
side.
Yeah, but she hadn't given birth at all yet anyway. So that was really a myth to explain why.
It's a myth. That's
Yeah.
not getting, that's
Yeah.
a logical answer.
And we know from biology and from science that, you know, our ancestors were quadrupeds. And by having to stand up, it closed the pelvis, and also having a bigger brain, humans are born prematurely. And that big brain in the smaller pelvis is, you see some animals, the deer is born and it just runs off into the forest, right? But we are born way premature. Imagine putting even a 1-year-old baby by itself out. There's no way. So we have a good example. We have a good reason for why there is pain in childbirth. Maybe afterwards I'll tell you a good joke about it, but not today. Yeah, over here.
The snake of that story was, the snake of the story was punished to be forever crawling on its belly. But snakes have always crawled on their belly.
Yeah.
So even before this event, it was still a snake.
Well, so that's the assumption. That word there in Genesis is nachash. And actually, nobody really knows what that animal was. One of my best friends, Hector Avalos, he was the first Hispanic to get a PhD in biblical languages from Harvard. He wrote these wonderful books. Some of you probably read his books. He was my go-to guy for the Hebrew. And he said, they really don't know what that animal was, but in context, we assume that since it probably had legs to begin with, but since it ended up crawling on its belly, then it was probably a snake. By the way, Genesis doesn't call it Satan. It's only the Christians who came back who called it Satan. So it's not called the devil in Genesis. So snake is not bad. And again, it's probably one of those myths to why these animals going around without any legs. It was the tempter. But do you think maybe introducing Eve is introducing too many questions? Or should I keep it in? Okay.
You might consider a verse that they would use to explain free will,
Yeah.
if it exists. I don't know.
Well, there's a verse in Jeremiah, I forget exactly. Humans do not have the control to plan their lives. It is only God who directs everything. So that's kind of anti-free will. It's kind of a deterministic. And the Quran even says some things like that too. The ways of man are determined. We're like machines. It says, you know, we don't really have the choice. Of course, theologians try to interpret that to me. Well, that only meant some lack of control. We still have the freedom to choose God or not. I wrote a book called Free Will Explained, where I go into that whole, and there's no agreement on free will. There's not even an agreement on the definition of free will. And even the libertarians, lowercase l, not capital L, but the libertarian position that we have total freedom, even they have to refer back to something that's deterministic. Because if there's a libertarian spiritual free will, well, what determined that? It's determined by, maybe not by the laws of nature, but something. So we're all determinists. Even if you think you have total free will, you're still a determinist because something has to determine what's making your decisions. But yeah, there's a couple of verses that talk about that God is in control, or nothing happens without God making it happen, which means you and I, what are we? We robots or what? But I didn't use the word free will in this opening statement. So I don't know if he might bring it up though. Is it a good idea to start with a story like that? Because you have a picture in your mind, right? And then to wrap it up with the story?
So you made mention that the oil, there were a number of steps, you might call them ingredients for the magic recipe. And one of them was the oil, and it had to be prayed to these certain individuals at an institution. What if one of those steps wasn't followed correctly? And so they're being punished for not following the recipe exactly. Their souffle is not rising.
Yeah, well, that would mean, however, that you could follow that recipe. And I bet it's been tried enough millions of times. We would expect to see some statistical difference. I'm prepared, by the way, if he challenges me on the failure of prayer, if he points to some of these studies that show that prayer does work, I'm ready for that, because there are a couple of studies. There's two that I know about where that people prayed for actually statistically meaningfully did slightly better. It wasn't like night and day. It was like 85% of this group it was prayed for got better, but only 72% of this group. So there is some statistical things. However, there's a whole bunch of other studies, larger studies, that either fail to replicate, like Bert's study in 1980, or they even show that people prayed for did worse. So you can quote Benson's study out of Harvard, and especially people who were prayed for that knew they were being prayed for, they did worse. And maybe there's something about knowing you're being prayed for. It makes your blood pressure go up or something. I don't know. Whoa. So if he brings that up, during rebuttal, I'll be able to refer. And they want to cherry pick. Look at the Bird study in 1980. People prayed. There was a study in Korea, fertility, women trying to get pregnant, and intercessory long distance prayer study. And the group that was prayed for actually had higher rates. So there you go. So we can't ignore that. We have to put that into the data that we have. Although, of course, later on, other researchers will question the methodology, maybe, because how do you control for prayer? What if you're praying for this group and not this? But there might be people all around the world interfering by praying. You know what I mean? How do you control? How do you make sure these people are not being prayed for? There's no way to control that. And this fellow in Arizona who was doing a study of I think it was smoking addiction, one of these things, a drug thing. And they were doing a control. And so they were doing a news story about the results. And the cameraman was filming the story. And the cameraman said, hey, what if I start praying for one of those people? Would that interfere? And the researcher says, don't do that. Don't do that. As if that would corrupt or pollute the study. Anyway, and then in a debate, you have to be ready. I don't know what he's going to say, right? He probably doesn't, unless he's watching this. Yeah.
Left out hellfire and brimstone for eternity for people that don't believe. Is that because you're focusing on the Old Testament versus things that were introduced in the New Testament?
Well, I could put in hell. I mean, he's a God of love, and yet he created hell. You think I should put that in?
Well, when I was a kid and being raised in a fundamentalist church, that was really the kicker. You either believe or you're going to burn in hell.
Yeah.
And to me, you're talking about the attributes of a terrible man. God, that's the worst.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine, no matter who I would hate on this earth, what they could do to me, I'd want them to suffer for an eternity in hell.
Yeah, a good point.
So I didn't hear that mentioned, and that was like the biggie in terms of God's badness.
Yeah, I could put that in there. And in terms of God saying he's just, right? So hell is the same punishment for everybody, right?
Yeah, they're afraid of hell, though, literally.
But the point is, hell is eternal punishment for everybody. And its justice requires that the sentence fit the crime. So if a kid steals cookies from the cookie jar, you don't send him to eternal torture forever. You assign a sentencing and a punishment that is just, not less. If it's less, you call it mercy. If it's more, you call it injustice. It's unjust. So hell is ultimately unjust because there's no merit there.
Now, we even debate the death penalty in the world, right?
Yeah.
But we're not talking about eternal suffering. So I would just, to me, that's the big kicker about evil God
Yeah,
is
okay.
eternal hell.
Yeah, I should put that in there then. At least I should say the word in there
Just one.
and see if it comes up. So do I need to pay you royalties or something? Okay. There's somebody over here on that side of the room.
To my ears, when I hear in a speech like that, you say the word he, that already assumes existence. That's what it sounds like. It sounds like someone who's acknowledging that he exists already and trying to prove otherwise. So, I mean, if you were to say, it doesn't flow well in a speech, but you get the gist of it. I mean, you're really saying this alleged character allegedly said, you know.
Yeah, I know.
How you
That's
attempt
tough.
that, it just sounds like you're already giving in, you're already conceding when you use the word he.
Well, yeah, and that's a good point. And if I get challenged on that during the debate, I have a good rebuttal for it. You know, I could say, in the story of the three little pigs, do you think the big bad wolf was a bad character? And if he says yes, well, there you go. You just judged a fictional character. Does that mean you think he really exists? So before I gave that list of contradictory stuff, before I gave that list, I said the Bible God, which means the God that's in the Bible, that God. And then I went he after that. It would slow it way down to have to.
No, it would slow it down a lot. I'm just saying, if you're trying to convince people, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, okay.
The Bible God exempts you to criticism.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I should make sure maybe at the beginning to be sure to I mean, I'm saying even if he did exist, I still wouldn't like the guy, but
If the alleged he.
yeah. Well, a lot of writers who criticize the Bible, they say that same thing. Like in the introduction of the book, they'll say, by the way, you know, this is we're talking about a character. Like we talked about Voldemort or Cruella de Vil or any of these other characters. We can judge their evilness even if they don't exist.
I think you need to change the pronouns. They
Might be good, but consider the audience I'm talking to. That audience, yeah, they would get that. Oh, you're being so woke, aren't you? Would distract them, but oh, Walt has it. Okay. We can't hear you yet. I think he's going to have to turn up the volume.
You're muted, Walt.
Yeah. You know, the feeling I had when you were going through the examples was that kind of the forest got lost for the trees. So if you could craft a phrase something like the Bible describes a God who blah blah blah. So does that God exist? Isn't this a contradiction? And so if you craft the phrase of skepticism about the God existing and talk about it that way, then you keep making your point every time you pick an example.
All right. Well, I'll try that way and see if it runs to 12 minutes, maybe. Or I could cut something. Is there anything that should be cut, do you think? The example of the woman catching her husband. I mean, that's visual, but is that really necessary? Could I do without it?
I feel like people relating to that.
Yeah, there will be a lot of people relating. Or maybe the line about any criminal knows that can explain. Maybe that line could go.
Okay.
I prefer the
Yeah. Okay.
It's great. It's great.
Mm.
The examples show your expertise, and that's I wouldn't eliminate any.
And every one of those examples, I have a rebuttal sheet with more stuff, because if he says, where does God say he's confessedly unmerciful? Well, I'll have that. And you don't want to bring up anything in a debate you're not prepared to defend. And if you really are not prepared to defend it, don't bring it up. And if you don't put it on the table during the debate, then it's not fair for them to attack something that you haven't brought up. Sometimes the opponents, I'll do an opening and the opponents are rebutting something I wrote 7 years ago and some, you know what I mean? It wasn't even relevant. They're rebutting me as a person rather than the issues. So you have to be careful. And if you just throw out lines that like this, you got to be ready, because in a debate, they might challenge you on that exact, give me your proof. What is your evidence? So you go to a debate with a notebook, 95% of it you don't use, but it's there just in case that issue comes up. So
The words God is love that Christians and others hang on to.
he wants to
For me, can you hear me on the microphone? Okay.
yeah.
So the 3 words, God is love, that just begs a challenge in your argument, right? So if I was starting, and not to criticize yours because I love it, but it's just like, the Bible says God is love. Really? Well, let's talk about that. Boom. The rest of it just in court doesn't stand, right?
Yeah, so that is good, because that's quoting the Bible.
Because that's what they hang on to. People that love them, have learned and been programmed by the Bible. They hang on to those little short phrases.
Yeah. What did you notice? I threw a bunch of them in. A good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, or don't build your house on the sand. That kind of stuff that
Like that.
resonates with them. So yeah, I should. And one of them I should say, well, God says he's a loving father, so I should say,
Quote the Bible.
yeah,
God is love.
yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Okay, that's good.
Sorry.
Explanation.
Now I owe you 2 royalties.
Is there concrete facts, archaeological, scientific, geologic facts, evidence that you could use to counter his existence? I mean, like, for example, there's the argument of the Earth only being 5,000 or 6,000 years old versus the plethora of geologic evidence to the contrary, universe, evidence that stars are older, et cetera, et cetera.
You need scientific evidence that there is no such thing as the firmament over the flat Earth. When I was a kid, I thought firmament just meant sky, but it actually was a bowl. They had this cosmology where there was this thing there. And nowhere in the Bible does God say the Earth is 6,000 years old. Nowhere does that say that. In fact, there are a lot of old Earth creationists as well, who in Genesis where those days were as 1,000 years. So they're not all committed to a young Earth. Some of them are more sophisticated. Some of them know more. Some of them know some science actually. So, but maybe there's a lot of things you could bring up a lot of contradictions from archaeology to question the reliability of the Bible. But I just want to go after what that God himself said, and use that as a self-contradictory thing. Like Jericho, the early Israelites came up with this myth that Jericho was defeated by their ancestors, right? But we now know it wasn't. Jericho did fall, but it was much earlier by the Egyptians. But they didn't know that at the time, and they were imagining their own history that it was their people that did it. So you can show things like that. You can show anachronisms. During the time of the patriarchs, when they were writing in the 5th century BC about what happened centuries earlier, they talked about camel caravans, but there were no camel caravans. Camels were not domesticated until centuries later. So there are anachronisms in there. There were camels, they were wild, but they were not used at that time as caravans, and yet they write about them as if they were. So you can bring up a whole bunch of that kind. That's a different debate. Is the Bible reliable? Then you could go into that kind of stuff. And of course, they will find. One of my opponents actually showed me an ancient cave drawing of a camel. He said, "Oh, they had camels back then." I said, well, yeah, but were they domesticated, herds of camel that were carrying goods? No, not at that time, but if you can think of another example, maybe.
Maybe you could talk about the evolution of God in human societies.
Yeah, well,
The
that
concept of God evolving over time from a multi
polytheism.
polytheism, and even before that, worshiping nature and the sun and the moon. Now evolving into a monotheistic belief system.
Yeah, the trouble with that, and that's good stuff, but they call that the naturalistic fallacy. Just because you have a natural explanation for it doesn't mean it's not their supernatural explanation. By the way, here's a good question you can ask Christians. If monotheism is an improvement over polytheism, what's the next logical improvement? Of course, some of us would debate whether monotheism actually was an improvement. Maybe polytheism was actually better for our species, but that's a different question.
And these myths evolved before the invention of modern tools like microscopes and telescopes, which help us to answer those questions which we previously answered with these myths.
So when I mentioned germs, there's a lot to say about it, but I just hit it. Why wouldn't the loving Father have told us back then about germs and pathogens and all that? And I had to be careful because Jesus nowhere was discouraging, was nowhere saying you shouldn't wash your hands, but he actually didn't wash his hands, and the Pharisees were challenging him because according to their laws they had to, and we don't have time for it, but Jesus' response is a total non sequitur. Oh, you're criticizing me. Well, what about you? That kind of thing, rather than sticking to the issue. But yeah, well, his writers were the people who wrote it.
Yeah, is there any way you could add a humor to the whole debate?
Well, I thought there was some humor with the husband saying, "I can explain." I don't know if that was funny. But do you have a suggestion? Is there something else that I could?
I talked to you earlier about it, where the cartoon characters,
Calvin and Hobbes.
Calvin and Hobbes, where Calvin goes, he asks questions about Santa. And Hobbes goes, well, isn't Santa part of a religious ceremony? And Calvin goes, I would have got the same questions about God.
Yeah, that could work. But that audience will interpret that as ridicule.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They'll say you're ridiculing us. And I want to try to stay away from any type of attacks of, just stick to what it says. And when you hear me read some of these things, you're thinking how ridiculous, right? But when they're hearing them, they're not thinking how ridiculous. They're thinking this is part of my system.
Yeah, I'm just curious what you think their kind of opening statement will be, what their main arguments will be, and then how you can undermine those.
I don't know what it'll be. The only thing I know about this fellow is he's really smart. He seems like a nice guy. Elias Ayala, is that his name? I might be remembering. I'm also doing a debate in Canada after that, which will be on national TV. It'll be a live debate on national TV. So I don't know. The only thing I know about him, he's real big into the philosophy stuff. So I'm guessing he will do stuff like the existence of immaterial minds. What is it when you decide to move your hand? What is it inside of you that made that? Something immaterial is happening that's causing your body. He uses a lot of stuff like that.
It's not specific to the God of the Bible.
No, it's not. It's not. So what I'm kind of hoping, and I hope he's not listening, is that he will go that route, and I can say just that. I can say, let's get to the topics. This gets back to the God of the Bible. And I could even say, for the sake of argument, for today's debate only, this is not true, but let's just assume all those philosophical, okay, now let's get to the God. How do you get from there to there? And Adam Lloyd Johnson, this book that's coming out, he was smart enough at the beginning to say he was only arguing for mere theism. He was not arguing for the God of the Bible, because he knows that's murky waters if you try to get into that. Although in the book, he did bring up prophecy of Daniel. So he did bring up some evidence. And he brought one other thing. Anyway, he did eventually get to some Bible stuff, which was fun. That gave me an in, because he brought it up, so I got to go after the book of Daniel. They say there's, and so it's possible my opponent will bring up evidence, even though he's the pre-supper. He might say, well, there's fulfilled prophecies, right? And there are miracles, and miracles was my big thing in this opening statement. You know, the absence of miracles proves that a God of miracles doesn't exist. And they'll say, well, my Aunt Bertha was in the hospital and she was supposed to die, and we prayed for her and she didn't die for 3 more weeks. But you know, those kind of anecdotal things, in which case I just have to go to the studies, I guess, because how else do you study? You can't use anecdotes. You have to, and to their credit, a lot of people have honestly tried to study these exact things to see if it makes a difference. And notice that I also use the word petitionary prayer in my opening statement, because there's other types of prayer, like prayer of thanksgiving. Prayer can have a beneficial effect. Prayer can make you relax, but it happens in all religions. It's like meditation, you're breathing. So prayer can actually have some psychosomatic benefits. Prayer can actually be a very useful thing to you. But I was careful to say, when you pray a petitionary prayer, that in that case, right, you pray for a amputated arm to grow back, right? I mean, that would be something. Wouldn't that be amazing to see that? And I've heard stories of people say, in Africa, somebody lost their leg and it grew back, right? Wow, that proves there's God. And so I say, amazing. Wow, thanks for telling me that. Now tell me where I can read about it. Where's, give me the evidence. And they never do. It was a story that they heard about, a story from somebody who told them, and I think we have to be careful to say, thanks for telling me that. This changes everything. Give me your evidence. Where's the doctor's report? Where's the videotape? Where's the, you know what I mean? Ask them for that when they make these claims, because they're hoping, like most believers, that when you say that, that people will just go, yes, praise God. Yes, I heard this story. So, and so far, at least in the last 40 years that people have been hitting me, I have seriously taken them at their word and looked at their claim. I even called one of the churches, and one of my friends, Dave Gustafson, there was a healing down in Florida, and it was in the newspapers. And so I called, and I finally found that ministry, and they said, oh yeah, the pastor of the church, he was prayed for and he was healed. And I said, well, can I talk to that pastor? Well, he's dead now. So there was no evidence. It was just, exaggerated. Yeah.
You might want to Google or do an internet search for the guy's name, the opponent's name, to see if he's practicing his speech online.
Well,
evidence notoriously fake by a good magician.
It wouldn't be bad if he did see this, because we would have a better debate then, right? I mean, we would be more, but.
In your example of an arm growing back, that if that was observed, and we say it's a miracle because normally arms don't grow back, that's in humans.
Yeah.
But we do know that if I have a salamander and I cut off his leg, it can grow back its limb. Is that a miracle? No, that creature can do that. I, as a human, cannot. But in the near future, maybe our modern scientific medicine can discover what it is that allows a salamander to grow back their arm, and then apply it to me or someone who. Yeah. And does that make it a miracle? No.
Pretty amazing. But if they did it right now, before
what?
Before the technology to grow back an arm, if they did it this week, maybe. Somebody has a question back here.
You hear me? Cool. Okay. So you used the word germs.
Yeah.
And I think that they're probably more potent examples that you could, like, for instance, If germs could be associated with bacteria could have positive effects, but if you mention like malaria, I can't imagine any positive effect of malaria.
Oh, yeah.
Guinea worms, I mean, worms literally crawl out of, there could be more potent examples that would make everybody cringe a little bit more, that because germs could be seen as, oh, bacteria, oh, they're no, kill.
Well, he didn't tell us about those either, but still, but yeah, maybe,
Part of the point,
maybe
that
pathogen.
bacteria can be good and bad, is that not part of the point?
Yeah.
Like why it's a powerful argument is if it's good and bad,
Yeah,
then that'd be in there for sure.
yeah.
Like it's got application that God can claim agency over.
Can you say the same thing about viruses? Are there any good viruses?
The CRISPR virus, the mechanisms they're using to use CRISPR.
Oh, yeah,
to
okay.
trim.
So what about, would pathogen be a better word maybe? Because that means suffering and pathos. But in informal talk, the germ theory of disease is sort of, I guess. Yeah, malaria. The great intelligent designer gave us mosquitoes. Yeah,
I have a point, on your David story.
okay.
So a guy who was running a Baptist booth at a farmer's market, we discussed this story because he wanted to claim that God was very just. And so of course I brought up the David story, injustice, right? So you brought up that because of his adultery, God has his wives and concubines raped. He claimed that they were raped in a tent, so it wasn't so bad. And that the guy was good looking. But I think that you said it was done in front of everybody.
Well, I think I'll have to look. I think it's in the Sight of the Sun. I think it said. I think,
He said it was done in a tent.
well, the point was that some other men are going to get hold of your property, Dave, and everybody's going to see that. I mean, that's what a punishment to him that somebody steals his wives, plural, by the way.
Concubines.
Yeah, yeah. Let me look that up. I think it said your wives will be. What was the word? They will lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. I think that's the phrase. I'll look it up.
And God also kills one of his kids.
Yeah, yeah. As a punishment. So there you go. Is that just? To punish children for the sin, and sometimes it's to the 7th generation. That's even in the 10 Commandments. Did you know that? Yeah. 60? 6? Okay, well, whatever. And then there's a verse, maybe I should bring this in, that said, a bastard cannot enter the congregation until the 10th generation. So, I mean, whose fault is it if you're born a bastard, right? In the first place. But who's keeping track of 10 generations? How do any of us know that 8 generations ago, we didn't have a bastard in our history? How do we know that? So, and we're going to church, obviously it was exaggerated. And some theologians and apologists will admit there's a lot of exaggeration and metaphor and poetry in the Bible. It didn't literally mean like when God said that the Israelites should kill every man, woman, and child and all the cattle, and it's totally genocide. That was a phrase. Kill every man, woman, and child was like saying lock, stock, and barrel. It didn't really literally mean kill everyone. But they try to say things. And a good response to that is that, well, if there is so much metaphor in the Bible, then, the prodigal son was a parable and maybe Adam and Eve were metaphors. Where do you draw the line? Maybe what other characters in the Bible are metaphors? Maybe even Yahweh himself is a big metaphor. How do we know that's just not one big figure of speech? And you're pretending like it's an actual thing, but and they can't tell you where to draw the line. Usually with literary criticism, there's cues. I mean, you can tell if something writing poetry, you give them some slack, right? They're exaggerating. Or maybe in the text it mentions, so there are places where there is legitimate metaphor and exaggeration, but if it doesn't say it, I think the first step is to take it at face value, unless there's some other reason that that you should mitigate that interpretation. And interpreters and translators don't agree. That's all these different translations. These are experts in the Bible languages, and they're producing Bibles that don't agree with each other. So what does that take? Yeah, which one? Yeah. They say the original autographs. word. And I'm thinking maybe one of my tactics, if he refers to revelation, we presuppose revelation. I might write out a revelation that I got from the God who created Yahweh. Okay? And maybe I'll there is actually a God mentioned in the Bible, El Elyon, who gave Yahweh the nation of Israel, El Elyon. And so I might write out a revelation from El Elyon saying, I created Yahweh. He's sort of a problem child, but he's learning, you know. And if he challenged me on that, then I'll say, why? On what grounds are you challenging my revelation? Tell me why. Why are you skeptical? And if he tells me why, I'll say, well, now you understand my skepticism, right? You understand. So I don't know if I can pull that off, but I was thinking of having a white cat come up to me and speak in perfect Spanish. It gives me this revelation from El Elyon, and I'll write it down, and it's a revelation. Is that too extreme, or what do you think that might work?
Might take too long.
Well, during rebuttal, though,
Rebuttal.
I think we're going to have 40 minutes to go back and forth before questions, so we might have a chance to do that. And he's real big on revelation, so maybe something like that. Because when you read some of the books of the Bible, it doesn't say who even wrote it. Who wrote the book of Jonah? We don't know. It's a story. It's a weird story, crazy story. And yet it's in the Bible, so it must be God's word. We don't know who wrote it. We can't check their credentials. We can't check, we don't know. It's just a story that we've been told. A lot of the books are that way.
They are.
Yeah, or what mushrooms were they? Eating? Especially Revelation. John of Patmos and Revelation, boy. He was angry. He was mad at the Romans. He was really, really mad.
Would you consider the case of Neil deGrasse Tyson, how he uses the example of saying, well, do you believe in Zeus and Jupiter and Neptune? And the person would say, no, I only believe in the God of the Bible. Well, and Neil deGrasse Tyson says, well, I just don't believe in one more God than you don't believe in.
Well,
So
he says that a lot, but he wasn't the first to say that. But others have said that.
Would you want to ask this person in debate their buy-in on some of the other gods of other religions? And if they say, well, no, they don't exist, well, why does this one exist?
Well, he will say that the Christian system is internally coherent. It answers more questions than, let's say, the worship of the Lord Ganesh over in India, for example. There's hundreds of millions of people, good people, smart people, who regularly pray and give money to Lord Ganesh, a god with the head of an elephant, right? And they have an internally coherent, and the Bhagavad Gita has a revelation from Krishna to Arjuna, and he's powerful. So isn't that system at least as internally coherent as yours? So why are, so that's I might bring that up in rebuttal, but it depends where he goes. If he really pushes on revelation, then I could go that way. But there's all sorts of other stories of, even I'm a member of a Native American tribe, and we have some stories too from the gods, and they're all different, and they even change through time, but they're all over the planet. People have been coming up with these stories, but it's kind of tricky when you're debating a person from the philosophy of religion who's into the, you know what I mean? There's a lot of terminology they use, and if you get down too much into the exact God and that, they kind of want to stay away from that. They want to talk about general principles, meaning that if my philosophical arguments are good, that provides the perfect framework within which my God can fit. It doesn't necessarily prove my God, but it gives me intellectual justification, they say, for believing.
Dan, I was thinking your biggest challenge is you're making all your points to prove a point and keeping that other person on point with what you're saying. In other words, if they try to go out and say, but what about something else? Then my challenge, if I was debating in your shoes, would be to pull them back into, but what about what I was just saying?
Yeah, well, I'm going to do that.
Okay, would you answer what I'm saying first, and then we can debate something else later.
Yeah,
That would be hard.
and I'm prepared to say something like, if our debate topic had been different, then I would have prepared differently.
Right.
Yeah, but I came here for this topic.
And I'm
And-
interested in what you have to say about what I just said rather than
Yeah,
changing topics.
yeah. Well, his rebuttal is gonna have to, the rebuttal has to reply to what you said in the opening statement.
Okay,
And it's one of the rules of debate that they don't always follow.
right.
You should not rebut anything that is not put on the table during that event. Because, I might have 12 or 15 different arguments I could bring, but I'm only gonna touch 4 or 6 of them, right? So he would be out of line to try to rebut stuff that I did not bring, even though I could defend it. I could just say, but this is not our debate right now. We're sticking to it. And we have a clock ticking, so we can't do it all.
So his responsibility in this debate is to answer to the evidence that you're putting on the table.
Yeah, during his rebuttal.
So the question I'd have of that guy is, well, what do you think of what Dan's saying? Not something else, but what do you think of exactly the God that he's portraying in those
But he has
instances?
to, that's the debate. And the
I hope
audience,
so.
the audience is gonna see that and they're gonna expect him to
I
respond.
hope he does.
And by the way, you probably heard of the Gish Gallop, where Dwayne Gish would do an opening statement and he would put like 20 different things in it. And there's no way during a 7-minute rebuttal you're gonna hit all of them. So maybe I could be accused of that. I'm bringing in a lot of stuff. And I might say, just respond to the prayer miracle part. Just respond to that, right? I mean, to me, that's the big thing. That's the evidence. We can actually see it and test it and measure it. So that's if you don't want to talk about all these other internal contradictions, then let's just stick with the miracles, and then it could be fruitful. But there's 40 minutes there where we don't know which way it's going to go, and of course I have to respond to what he said. Also, whatever he said, I better be ready to say something. And sometimes in a debate you're not ready. You should at least say something about it. So you're checking the box. At least, mention it. But are we still good for time, or are we?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so.
In the front row here.
You talked about, we are talking about the debate, but all your debate, you do them in front of an audience.
Yeah, it's in the audience.
So what's the impact? Did you have can you talk about the impact, like the people get back to you from the audience? Because you told us also, you never have a debate that is asked by an audience like us. It's always from the other side. And so if you could talk a little bit about your experience over the years about the impact of the debate on the audience.
Okay, so that's a good question. And we don't always know. A few of the debates, I've done 141 of them, which are actual public since 1985. That sounds like a lot of debates, but that's like 4 a year, basically. And sometimes they actually measure. Like at the university, like the Christian club and the atheist club, they put on a debate, and then we pack the room with the students. And sometimes they will have a forum. As you enter this debate from 1 to 10, what is your position? Then as you leave the debate, what is your position? Sometimes they do that. And every time they have done that, we've looked at the analysis afterwards, the delta has always been in my direction. Not always a lot, but hardly anyone would go from a 10 to a 1, right? But somebody might go from a 7 to a 5. And so they looked at that. And once in a while they go the other way. But what you take the whole balance, then there was a shift in that audience. And so I would call that a win. I mean, if there's a move in that direction. In Oxford, they vote with their feet. It's very formal. The Oxford Union, I told you about the formal debates with the tuxedos and all that stuff. So there's the proposition, which is a formal proposition. This house believes there is no God. That would be the proposition. Or the opposition, they would debate. So at the end of the debate, they tell the students, it's mostly students, there's some professors there, as you leave the room, if you are in support of the proposition, exit through this door. And if you support the opposition, exit through that door. So they count who goes out, right? So the first time I did a debate in Oxford, it was what, 12, 13 years ago. More people went out my door than theirs. It was like, I don't know what it was like, 58 to 42, something like that, the percent. It was a greater percentage than what Obama won that election that month by. So I consider that a win. So what year was that? It was 12 years ago? But the second time we did a debate, which was just a year and a half ago, the topic was, this house believes God is a delusion. It's a different topic. Not that God exists, but God is a delusion. And Alex O'Connor was on our side. There was 3 against 3. And Phil Zuckerman, the sociologist, the 3 of us went against. And the other side didn't prepare. One of them was a cardinal, a Catholic cardinal from Africa. Another was a Sikh from India. He was a member of the Lord of House of Commons, a Lord in the House of the government. And all they did was kind of give a rah-rah speech for their religion. They didn't really engage in. The only people who really did was students. There were 2 students who participated. They were sharp. There was a theist student, atheist. She was wonderful. And then a really bright, she was the atheist, and a really bright theistic student from Scotland who brought up fine tuning. And that was the only argument any of the other side brought was fine tuning. So I was able to rebut that. So we had a strategy, Phil and then Alex, and then I was sort of mopping up with rebuttals. And but more people went out the other door than our door this time. And some of the atheists said they went through their door, the wrong door, because they said, we don't believe in God, but we don't want to go so far as to claim that my Christian friends are deluded. Is God a delusion? So they didn't believe in God, but they didn't want to go as far. And Richard Dawkins was there in the audience. He was sitting with us because he wrote the book, The God Delusion, right? So so I can kind of see why we lost that debate on voting with your feet, because the topic was pretty tough. Even if God doesn't exist, are your religious relatives deluded? Well, maybe some of them, right? But do you really want to say that they're deluded? Maybe they're wrong, or they have a temporary, bad idea. But I have heard from people years later who said, I was at your debate and it got me thinking. I was on the other side, but for the first time I started thinking. And you know what? Now I don't believe anymore. So that's kind of fulfilling. But it's not going to happen right there. And of course, the opponent's not going to change. And so if you do a debate, you're talking to your opponent, but you're really talking to that audience. Especially at a university where there are students who really are in the middle. They're not 1 or 10. They're actually in there, and this is the first time they thought about this. So they're likely to move one way or the other. So it can happen. And even if you don't know what happens, it's educational. Our organization is an educational group, so at least we're getting the ideas out. And Gordon Stein did a debate once. He was in Southern California. He died. But after the debate, somebody came up to him and said, I disagree with you. I'm a Christian and I disagree with your atheist arguments, but I got to tell you, I didn't realize that atheists had anything coherent or articulate to say. I didn't realize you could even, this is the first time I've actually heard an atheist present something logical. So I think you're wrong, but I want to thank you for taking it seriously. You know what I mean? So there's that happens too. So somebody in the back here.
Yes, just a couple things. In your initial statement, you used logic a few times. What I've often heard theists attempt to say is that God adheres to a logical set that you can't understand. It's a superset of logic of some kind. I was gonna just make you be aware of that. Also, I think it's okay to give God agency in that whole storytelling thing. I wouldn't worry too much about the they thing. My own perspective is that they believe it's a real thing, and you should engage like it is so that you're on their ground when you also bring all the rest of the arguments to the front. And I think giving a fictitious character agency is valid. I think that's fine. Like Spider-Man has agency in his stories, right? He's the main character.
But should I say that maybe more explicitly at the front?
And the top. Yeah, and the top, just make it clear that you're representing that character, fictitious character has agency. And then the last one is, I'm a Canadian myself. Do you know who you're debating in Canada? Is it that?
He's a former Muslim.
Okay, so not who
his name is Abdu something. He's a former Muslim who's now a Christian.
Okay. And then do you know what province you'll be in? Because maybe I
Well,
can
it'll
make it.
be either in Toronto or Niagara. It'll be in that.
Ni-
The producers have they have a TV, they're doing a national TV thing. And he's finding their venue right now. I don't know exactly where. So I think Toronto would be better, but he says he has a really nice venue there in the Niagara area. So, and then people from New York could come up, be much closer for them. But I don't know. I don't know anything about it except his name, so I'll have to look at it. I did say during the logic, A is not equal to not A. So that kind of, I mean, could a God violate that?
Possibly. That's what they'll argue.
Wow. Yeah.
I know it's really difficult.
Yeah.
We have
Well,
another question.
Oh, a question online?
Yes, Alex, you're muted, Alex. Alex, you're muted.
Alex, you're muted.
Okay, I was wondering, in these debates, is it generally accepted that God is a person? And he has human characters, he has likes, dislikes, and all that stuff?
Yeah, God is a personal, that's what theism means. It's a personal being, as opposed to deism or deism, which God is a creator but not a personal being. So yeah, it has thoughts and desires.
Even evidence that our understanding of the universe breaks down doesn't bring a person into it, since all the people we know are part of the universe.
Yeah, well, if he brings that up, I guess, what would you say?
I'd say that what we know about people, from sociology and biology and all that, our human minds work a certain way for physical reasons. There are physical reasons why we think these things. And they're just their reactions to our environment. And since God presumably didn't have an environment, you wouldn't expect him to think it at all like we do.
Yeah. Well, they would say God is not a biological person with a physical brain. They would say he's a spiritual, immaterial mind. And no one's really been able to define that coherently, but they stick to it. They think there are immaterial minds. And what you and I know about a mind is a function of a physical brain or a physical computer or whatever. There has to be some physical hardware functioning from which the mind, I don't like the word emerges, but that the mind can be considered to be a function of. But in their minds, there is immaterial minds, and God is God is able to function at a higher level above the natural world. I do have an argument that I used in other debates called FANG, the free will argument for the non-existence of God. And it's the idea is that if God's a person and God has free will, in order to have free will, you can't know the future. If you know the future is fixed and you have no period of uncertainty between now and the future. Like if God knows what he's going to do tomorrow at 12 noon, he knows it. He can't change it. So he is not free. And sometimes they will argue, well, God exists outside of time. They'll use that as if that were a coherent thing to say.
Yeah, I keep thinking, if you have free will, that means you don't know what you're going to do next.
Yeah, exactly. There has to be
Which is not will.
Even if you think I'm going to go to the store and order chocolate ice cream. Yeah, you think but you still have the ability to change your mind, and you could choose strawberry. And most definitions of free will there's a whole bunch of them, but free will is the ability to have done otherwise. That's how many philosophers define free will. Some define it differently. But you did one thing, but you could have done something else. And determinists say, no, you couldn't have. And so that's a whole different topic. But FANG is kind of powerful. And their only out is to say, well, God exists outside of time, and time's a dimension. So God knows what he's going to do. God knows that he was free to do what he wanted to do, but he knew it in advance that he would have done what he was free to do, right?
I'm free to follow my present course of action.
Is that another question? Oh, here's some question down here.
I just have a quick question. about theists. So do theists believe that God has legs? Because it seems to me God doesn't have legs.
Yeah, well, that's a big question. Most theists today, philosophers, got the sort of God of the philosophers, where he's an immaterial being who's above it all. But in the scriptures, God had a body. And there's this great book by the philosopher Francesca Stavrakopoulou called God and Anatomy. And especially in the Bible, God had a body, and Moses saw his backside. Remember, God said, "You can't see my face. Nobody can see my face and live." Although some people did see his face and live. But so he said, "I'll let you see my backside," which means what? He mooned it. So the question is, what exactly was Moses looking at? The Bible says that Moses saw the back. What was it? And when Isaiah saw God sitting on a throne, surrounded by the seraphim, they each had 6 wings, by the way. And why do you need wings in an immaterial world? I mean, what's flapping? But he saw God sitting on a throne, presumably upright relative to a center of gravity, sitting about with a body, right? So there's all sorts of actual bodily references to, and they did believe back then. Even the early Israelites believed God had an actual body. And when Abraham when God came and met and ate with Abraham, and Sarah was laughing in the tent, remember that? They sat down and they had a meal. And so Abraham was face to face with God, and then they walked for a while, and he warned him about Sodom and Gomorrah, all that stuff. So what was Abraham actually looking at? Was it a physical thing? Some of them say, well, God's immaterial, but he temporarily manifests himself, like a hologram or something, I suppose, or what, that eats food, and that you can argue with. And in fact, he did argue with him. So, and God then first
changed his plan.
Well, he changed his plan, but there still wasn't enough to save poor Sodom. And boy, what a story that I have a whole chapter in there about Sodom. That story about Sodom is just part 2 of a 3-part saga. And if you read the first, second, and third part, the whole thing is all about being able to reproduce sons and heirs to keep your family going. That whole thing is about it. And of course, homosexuals don't reproduce. They don't have heirs. They don't have. And when Lot escaped the city, and his wife turned into a pillar of salt and all that, and the 2 daughters got out, they just seen their fiancés burned to crisp, with this whatever that was, sulfur. They're fleeing with their father. And what's the first thought that comes to these daughters' minds?
Make sure.
How is our father going to have children now? Our fiancés are dead. So they came up with this plan to get him drunk so that he could get one of his daughters pregnant, right? So the whole arc of that whole bunch of stories is all about reproduction and having children, having sons especially. So, I mean, what girls are going to think the first thing? They just saw their mother killed and their fiancés killed, and they're escaping with their father. That's the thing they're thinking about? Our poor dad. It's not good. It obviously was written by some guy. The story was written by thinking, we're going to explain all this stuff.
Another idea, over here.
Oh, where are you? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Of the idea of superstitions. Would it be helpful during your period of making arguments during the debate to bring up some maybe common, obvious superstitions and compare them with God as a superstition?
What would be a good example?
I don't know, maybe some people buy lottery tickets or go to the casino and say, well, 7 hasn't come up in a long time, therefore it's due. Or the dice went on the floor, therefore the next number is going to be a 7. And when it is a 7, their human selective memory says, see, I was right. And when it isn't a 7, well, it could have been.
Yeah.
I don't know of other, common superstitions that people have, but God is a superstition, and this is similar to the other examples.
And humans are prey to superstitions. We still don't have 13 floors and a building.
Isn't that weird?
Right.
Some do
wrap it up with that.
Yeah, some have 13. And here's a question I don't know the answer to. is it the quantity of 13 that's superstitious, or is it the symbol? Because like in another base, like in hexadecimal, 1-3 is a different quantity. So would that be superstitious, or would you just stick with the actual quantity? What is it? I don't know. Somebody should research that.
And with that, we need to wrap
Oh,
it
we
up.
wrap
So
it up,
thank you
okay.
so much, Dan.